So we've built our main models, our little girl, Boo, and we've built the snail. Like I said before, the scenery, we'll probably just skip over that because it's all just basic geometry, and we're going to be reusing the shells that we've created for the snail as well. And building things like leaves, and blades of grass and things aren't very difficult, so rather than bog you down with building every little detail, I think we'll leave those bits to you, and it might be fun for you to play around with the geometry and come up with your own twist on it. So we've got the characters, like I said, and we need to start thinking about how we're going to render these. Now at the moment they have basic shaders applied, and these could render out perfectly fine if you're wanting a very simple image, you know, very subtle sort of shades, etc. on a skin, on a hair and on a dress. But what I'm going to do is add a bit more detail into some of the elements of her, just to make the whole illustration a bit more interesting. Now the skin I'm going to leave as it is, and we will get a lot of the detail through that via the shader. We want it to be quite simple anyway, because the illustration needs to have that sort of childlike innocence. The eyes I'll leave as they are as well. As you can see, if I move this around, I've applied a very basic reflection map to them, just to give them a bit more interest really. What we're going to do is we're going to add texture to the dress and to her hair. Now her hair is mainly to add in a bit more detail, a bit more hair, well, just so you can see the strands of hair, etc. on each section. And for a dress, this is just so we can add patterns, fabric detail, whatever you want really onto the dress. Again, just to make the whole thing a bit more interesting. Now I'm using Maya, but I'm going to try and gloss over and not get bogged down too much in the various tools that I'll be using, and I'll try and give more of a general overview of what we're doing, just so that you can apply this to different applications. So what we need to do first is see what the UVs look like on her dress as they are. Now I've already got a texture set up, a checker map texture, as you can see, and this just tells us that the UVs are rubbish, and they are set so that every quad fills the UV page. So we need to address that now, although that looks like quite a detailed dress if we leave it like that, like a patchwork. Anyway, so to start us off we need a set of UVs, and I'm just going to plane our map from the front straight through, and that gives us the UVs to start with. If I show you the UV editor, there we go. But that, as we can see, is overlapping the UVs on the front and the back ones are inverted. So let's fix that now. What we need to do now is just separate the front and the back, but not in the actual model, only the UV shell. So all I'm doing here, selecting the edges where I want to create seams, where I want the UV shell to be separated. Just go to Polygon, cut UVs, and you see those open up there. Now we just want to move the front and the back. Just see what I've got selected there. Got the front. Just move the front out, just so we can see them both. Now the back will be inverted, so what I can do is just do an unfold horizontally, and that will flip the back for us, like so, and it unfolds the dress a little bit more. So if we look at the UVs now, the back's the right way around, the front's okay, and the side we haven't got that stretching, but we've still got a seam down here. Now this character in this scene will be viewed from this angle, so it makes sense for us to hide the seam down this side here. So we'll keep the seam here, but we'll join up the UVs here, because this will be seen when we come to render. So what we could do is join the seam there to there, but first we're going to play around with the UVs a bit to get a bit of a better shape. And at the moment, although these look quite good, they're not going to be very good to paint upon. Say we wanted to draw a line along the bottom, if this was a stripy dress, we're going to have to draw the line in waves rather than a straight line. So we need to just adjust that first to make it a bit easier to paint upon. So all we're going to do is just flatten these UV lines here, these edges, and that will mean that we can just paint a line there, and in here, as we can see from this grid, we'll get a nice curve. So that just makes it easier for us when we come to paint the texture. We can take that a step further and also align them vertically as well, like so. And again, that will just make them a lot easier to paint on. And when we come to joining these seams here, they'll just snap together. Like that there and there, these edges, we can just sew those together without any issues. So we can continue on like that, aligning these edges, and then we'll sew these edges in the middle. And what we should end up with, I'll just deselect this. What we should end up with is something like this. As you can see, I've put it into the grid square. All these lines are nicely aligned, which makes it easier to paint upon. And I've tried to keep the collar straight as well, because obviously if we paint a texture onto here, it needs to go straight over the collar too. So they're the UVs for the dress. Now let's have a quick look at the hair. The hair again, I'm just going to briefly gloss over this. The hair is a very basic shape. If I just pull that out for a second. As we can see, when we created it, it was just a cube which we extruded and adjusted. So the UVs for that, again, just use basic projections. It's basic box mapping really. I mean, this is the UVs at the moment, but using basic projections, we can just end up with something like this. Now I think this is more than one hair strand. If I just pull one out for now so we can see. So that's just one lot of the hair. It's currently smooth using smooth mesh. If I press 1, that gives you a better idea of how it looks. See, we've just got front, back, bottom, side in nice lines, easy to work with, easy to paint on, and the texture itself can just be repeated as well. The bottom and the top, you don't really see those, so I've hidden them as flat lines here. Just undo that. And at the bottom, because we may use an alpha channel at the bottom of the hair, just to use a transparency map, just to give it a bit more of a hair feel and to enhance those individual strands, which we'll add in via the texture. So let's just switch models and we'll have a look at the textured version. Just like that. So as you can see, we've added a dress and we've added these individual strands into her hair. Now the hair itself is just quite a basic texture, and what I've done with the dress, I bring up the texture page. As you can see, we've been able to use those lines to make it easier for us to create these details here, and using the UV as a UV snapshot of the UV page, we've managed to be able to create these details too. And from that, we've also created a normal map, which is going to bring those details out of the dress. And I've also created a specular map, and that is the diffuse map with a bit of noise added in Photoshop or whatever application you want to use, and that'll just make these sort of sparkle slightly in the scene as we put this into the specular colour channel. If I zoom in, we'll see if we can see them sparkling. As you can see, we get a very little sparkle there as the light passes over it. It just makes it more of a girly, glittery dress. But now we have the UVs for the dress. Well, what I've also done is added just a transparency layer at the top for this lace part here. But this may not be the final dress we go with. Once we've posed her, put her in the scene, it may be that this sort of style and design doesn't fit with the rest of the scene. But now we've got the UVs, we've got a texture to work upon, we can change that easily later on if we need to. The hair again is just pretty much straight lines, and again a normal map just to bring out the detail a bit more there. So that's the dress and the hair UV'd. Like I said before, the body we will probably leave as it is and just use a nice shader to bring out that skin detail and keep it simple. And the same with the eyes, we'll leave those as they are. If I quickly switch to the snail, as you can see here, the body, again, I'm going to leave that and we're going to use the basic shader and try and get a nice feel for the snail body using that. But the shell, we're going to add a texture to that, but all I've done is if I open up the UV page again, very basic projection from the side, and then that's unfolded and then mirrored for the other side. Because in the scene, the snail's going to be looked at from this sort of angle, so I'll probably flip those UVs on that side. You're not going to see the scene. And besides, we may just add in on a very basic texture to the snail anyway, but we'll see how that goes as we're working on it. So that's applying basic textures to our characters just to add a bit more detail, and to go with that we're going to use basic shaders to enhance the skin and the snail and the eyes, etc. The next stage, now we've done this, is to finally pose Boo into the position that we need her in the illustration. Once we've posed her, put the snail in her hand, we can add in the other bits of the scenery, which like I said, I'll let you tackle that on your own. It's all basic geometry and you can put in as much or as little detail as you want. And then once we've posed her, it's then down to rendering. So we have our main characters, we've built Boo and we've built the snail. Hopefully you've been playing around with some sort of scenery as well to have her positioned in. We've also applied UVs and added texture to the key areas which we want to add a bit more detail to in the final render. And this just means that we don't have to mess about trying to wrap a texture around her body in Photoshop or whatever painting package you're working on. We will be adding some detail later on in Photoshop, but trying to paint on a dress texture, something like this, which we can see here, could be a bit of a nightmare, so we've addressed that already by applying it as a texture. So the next step is to take this character here and pose her like in the concept images. Now this is just her kneeling down, holding a stick in one hand and holding the snail, or little kipper as she calls them, in her right hand. There are a number of ways you can approach posing a character. Obviously you could put joints in, bind her to a skeleton and pose her that way, and that's a great way of future-proofing yourself as well, in case you need to put this character into any other poses. Perhaps you're going to use her for other illustrations, etc. So putting a skeleton in will mean that later on down the line you can easily just load in the file, put her in a quick pose and render her out. But because this is a one-off, I don't want to spend lots of time building a skeleton, binding, painting weights, etc. to get her bending exactly right. We can take a quicker option, and that's just to go straight in and physically edit the model. Now to start with, I'm going to hide the hair and the dress. We don't need to worry about these just yet. We're going to concentrate on the basic body, get this into the position we need, and then we can adjust the dress to fit the new body shape. So all we're going to do, we're just going to select vertices like so and rotate them to get her into the pose. So we need to make sure symmetrical modelling is on, and then I'm just going to select the arm like so, adjust the pivot of that selection, make sure I'm on rotation, put it roughly where I want the shoulder joint to be. So something like that. And then we can just rotate that. And just as easy as that, we've got the arms lowered. And because we've got symmetrical modelling on, it's automatically doing it to the opposite side. Again, we can do the same with the elbow. Bring this up. And then rotate this like so. And you can see how you can quickly get poses by adjusting just the vertices and adjusting the pivot point of your selection. So now we just need to go through, while we're in symmetrical modelling mode, we're going to concentrate on the parts of the body which are pretty much the same on either side. So the legs which are curled up underneath her, we could do those both at the same time as well. So again, we'll start off with her knees. Move the pivot up to her knee, and then we'll rotate that underneath. Make sure. Now this must not be completely symmetrical. So what I'm going to do, turn symmetrical modelling off, and we'll just work on both sides at the same time. This doesn't matter completely. You can bend those under like so, and then we'll deselect these here. Move the pivot up to the ankle, and then move these up like that. And to help us, we could also just create a quick floor plane. Again, I'm trying to be as general as possible without getting bogged down in different tools, so that you can apply this to different applications. Now, having the floor plane in means we can position the knees and the feet on the floor so we know exactly where it is. So just increase our selection like so. Go to the side view, move this pivot up, and then bring these legs round the front, and then we just continue on like that. And because it's quite a basic model, we're using smooth mesh to smooth it out. We've got fewer vertices to pull around, so it's a lot easier for us to work with. Now you'll get to areas like this where we haven't put enough geometry in to cater for the knee bending, but you don't need to worry about that. We've not put any UVs or anything on this model, so we can quite easily go in and physically edit it by inserting more edge loops. So we could just quickly go in, insert another one for the knee there, another one for the knee there, and that just gives us a bit more topology to play around with. And then we can use those to help round off the knee. Push this crease for the knee back a little, like so, making sure if you've turned off symmetrical modelling that you do both sides. And if you need more geometry in there, don't be afraid to add in more edge loops. The same with the fingers here. Looking at it now, we probably need another edge loop in here, in here, and here, so we can bend the fingers and keep the shape and the form of the digits. So that is just quickly how I'm going to approach posing the model. So let's just delete that floor. I'm just going to skip ahead a section. So here is what we're looking for. If I hide the hair and the dress again, like so. Now I've brought in these props as well, just to help. Again, when we're bending the fingers, you need to have something to bend round. So it's good to have this stick in that she's going to be holding, just so you know exactly how much the fingers need to bend. As you can see, we've added that extra geometry in there, extra edge loops like I mentioned before, and the fingers here to cater for that bending. Now, there are some weird artifacts with the model here, but you have to think ahead. Now, if I bring back the dress, as you can see, the dress hides a lot of her body, and this area back here is never seen. She's from about this camera angle, so we don't need to worry about the back. Remember, we put the seam for the dress down this side here. You can just see it there, because you're never going to see it in the final render. This is always planned as a render, a static render from this angle, with nothing else happening with this model, so you can quite happily hide anything down the back. Obviously, if this was going to be used for a 3D print or for something else where you see all of her, then you're going to have to put that extra bit of effort in to make sure the back looks as nice as the front. But this tutorial is all about doing something like this quickly, cutting corners without drastically affecting the quality. So don't worry about things down the back, just concentrate on what you can actually see. So going back to posing, here I symmetrically modelled her, adjusted the legs symmetrically, started off with the arms symmetrically as well, and you can see here the dress has only been roughly positioned around her. Under here needs pulling in, and the same under here. But those are tweaks we can do as we're going. When we come to start rendering, areas like that, which you may have missed or overlooked before, will show up. But the beauty of this is, even if we've got all the lighting in place, all the shaders in place, and we're on our final render, if we notice any errors with the model, we can go in and tweak it. It's not a big deal. So you've posed your model, you've got your snail in her hand, and again I've adjusted the bottom of the snail just so it fits with the shape of her hand. And here we have her sat in her little scene. Again, the floor, these rocks, all basic geometry, just with edge loops cut into it just to add a bit of variety to the surface. We've got another snail hiding behind this stone here. These empty snail shells lying around here. Now, depending on how this renders, we may need to build an inside to that shell there, but I'm not worried about that now. And just some green leaves, bits of grass, just to break it up a bit more and make it a bit more interesting. So now we've posed the model, we've compiled her scene, we're pretty much ready to start thinking about tweaking her shaders and adding some lighting and getting the camera set up so we're ready to render. And that is what we will look at in the next video.